All lives matter. All lives matter. Now, if that statement is offensive to you, and I think I have a fairly good idea of my subscribers, so probably I'm preaching to the converted here, but just perchance if someone happens to look at this video and they're offended by that statement, I would suggest that they are part of the problem. And this is something that does require a bit of consideration, actually. Because the statement in itself should be a no-brainer, right? It should be a harmless, utilitarian, inclusive, obvious statement. All lives matter. But because of the toxic way that things have developed this year, it has now been morphed into some sort of white identitarian or far right statement, which I don't think it is. Now, I appreciate there might be some right wing elements, some of them I certainly wouldn't align with myself, that maybe use the statement as a retort to Black Lives Matter. I haven't shied away from my thoughts on Black Lives Matter, the movement. I think they're divisive. I think they've got racist elements. I'm not a fan of them as a movement. That's an understatement. I think they're actually quite extreme, or at least they have extreme elements. Like any movement, you're going to have decent people. You're going to have people who are there with reasonable motivations, but I do think it's a divisive movement that's been given way, way too much pandering by the media and politicians across the board. Um, this statement, "All Lives Matter," it's just a very, very sad statement of where we are at. That a statement that could be so obvious is to some people offensive. Um, and I'm well aware of the arguments of Black Lives Matter activists. It goes something like this. They usually retort, oh, but we're not saying all lives don't matter. We're just saying right now Black Lives Matter. But if you're offended by the statement, um, you're not really proving to the contrary. If your response to the statement all lives matter is to get angry and say, yell racist, then what are you doing? You're just indicating that you think only Black lives matter. White lives don't matter. Asian lives don't matter. Hispanic lives don't matter. So there's a fundamental contradiction in that stance. I remember earlier in the year when there was that stunt, the banner flowing over Burnley football ground. And it was actually White Lives Matter on that occasion, not All Lives Matter. I wouldn't approve of it. I'm against identitarianism, full stop. I'm a white guy. I'm not interested in white movements. However, the response to it did indicate profound hypocrisies. There was immediately a police investigation, even though no actual crime had been committed. I mean, the guy, as I understand, had hired the small plane. It's not like he stole it or something, he'd hired it. Um, and yeah, some found the statement offensive, the banner, but no actual crime had been committed. And so no charges were made. Now I remember the time there was BLM activists at Burnley football ground because Burnley, like a lot of other football clubs and a lot of other organisations, is pandering to this Black Lives Matter movement. And they were saying it was disgraceful and it was shocking and it was terrible. I just think it reeks of hypocrisy that one sort of racial identitarianism is pandered to whilst another is vilified. It makes no sense to me. And this is coming from someone who rejects all racial identitarianism. But I do think that if we're seeing a rise in, call it what you will, populist right wing reactions, or white identitarian groups, it really isn't surprising when you get pretty aggressive black identitarian groups. Aggressive in the sense of forcefully pushing their agenda. And no, I don't accept that they're peaceful. Um, there may be peaceful activists, but the riots across the United States this year, resulting in 21 deaths, resulting in massive damage, um, resulting in arson, resulting in looting, not peaceful. And I know you're going to say, or rather, some people would say, oh, but you can't just blame BLM for that. Well, I don't. I also blame Antifa, and yeah, I blame Donald Trump as well for stirring up the flames. I think President-elect Biden is showing much more conciliatory tones. However, I am uneasy about the Democrats' coziness with Black Lives Matter and Harris and Biden. I think I'm making a mistake by being so cozy with them. But this is something that isn't going to go away just because 2020 goes away. Unfortunately, I think it's going to linger around. But let me just think about this statement. Well, Black Lives Matter right now. Okay. If the issue is Black Lives, all the focus, pretty much all the focus of Black Lives Matter is on police brutality. But there is far less focus on black crime, which is a rampant problem in our capital. Uh, Only yesterday, a young man was stabbed to death. He was a brother of a rapper. I happen to think that rap and violence go hand in hand. It doesn't mean I'm being insensitive to the victim. It's an awful thing when a young man loses his life. Um, but if you even mention the fact that there's a black on black problem in London and you're white, then it's deemed as racist, even though it's a verifiable empirical fact. It's just a reality. In fact, the Metropolitan Police has a department, I understand. I think it's called Trident that deals with this. Um, so it's a real problem, and it's that can be echoed in every major city in North America as well. So when Black Lives Matter say the issue is black people right now, my thinking is okay. Well, are you focusing on black lives being killed by black gangs? I don't think they are, at least nowhere near enough, because far more black people die in gang violence than at the hands of police. That's not to say there isn't a problem with the police, but it's just, I mean, obviously optics don't help. Those awful images of George Floyd dying understandably created an emotive response. I was angry at the time. You'd have to be pretty cold not to be moved by those images, but facts do matter. They really do. And I would go so far as to say it's evil. Evil to dishonestly stir up racial tension by creating a picture of something that isn't the whole story, that is based on trying to build up resentment, that's based on trying to divide people. I would say that is an evil thing. Um, but I think that if there's going to be an honest discussion about this, about the concept of lives mattering, consider this. Consider the fact that the grooming gangs operating in the north of England, the overwhelming majority of the victims were young white girls. Now, that's just a fact. Again, that's not race baiting any more than saying that the problem of black on black gang violence is a reality. That's also a reality. The majority of those victims were young white girls, and there were some Asian girls as well. But the culprits were overwhelmingly British Pakistani men. Now, there were some people such as Majid Nawaz and Sajid Javid and others who did speak out and say, look, we have a problem with British Pakistani men in doing this. It's not the same thing to say that if there's a particular problem, that's the same as generalizing or vilifying an entire group. Um, so what about the lives of those young girls? They may not have been killed, but the impact would have been profound. And what about cases where white people have been victims of racial hate crime. I can think of three young white men murdered for being white in this country in recent years. Um, and that was the motivation, racial hate crime. Now, do their lives matter? So, just to conclude and wrap this up, I don't like any form of racial identitarianism. I don't want to see a sort of rise in white identitarianism. But so long as the likes of Black Lives Matter continue to promote double standards and show contempt for a statement like all lives matter, not even white lives matter, all lives matter. All includes black people. That's the that's the irony of this. So this idea that if someone says all lives matter, they're somehow against black lives is perverse. It's utterly dishonest. Yeah, you might get some entitled Karens, to use a colloquialism in the States, that might use that term. I saw a ridiculous video from the Young Turks where they had this vocal Trump supporter woman, white woman, and it said Karen put in her place by Muhammad Ali. I'm thinking, what? Well, Muhammad Ali died 4 years ago. And what they done is they interspersed this video of Ali race baiting as he often did, and it didn't really prove a damn thing. But that's left wing populism for you. So I'm concerned, angry, and frustrated by the way racial identity politics is going on both sides of the Atlantic, but on this side as well, because we we don't have as deeply entrenched problems, I think, as the United States, but they're still out there. My message to Black Lives Matter is simple. If you really are an inclusive organization, if your issue really is just about getting justice for black people, fine. But don't then have a tantrum every time someone says all lives matter and say with a straight face that you're not against that principle. Because if you're responding to that in a hostile way, I'm sorry, but that proves that you are against that principle. It proves that you think that black lives do matter more. Um, and I think it's cowardly and shameful that segments of the media pander to this sort of stuff. The job of the media is to hold power to account and be consistent. To be consistent. It's just a very sad situation because even pointing out these things, everything I've said in this video can be verified, can be checked. Simply pointing out facts. Um, People would say I'm being far right and pandering to the far right. That disgusts me to even be thought of in the same bracket as the likes of the EDL. But all I am saying is, so long as double standards prevail, and so long as there is this attitude that, um, for example, the grooming gang victims, that somehow it's okay to dismiss that, because let's not forget, and this is an important point, the reason that police forces didn't intervene as they should have done in those cases, not to the extent that they should have, the reason authorities didn't intervene is because they didn't want to be seen as racist. And my message to Black Lives Matter is, if there's such a thing as white privilege, then how do you answer to those young girls? Where's their white privilege? Because that's a sort of divisive, hateful term that's thrown out there. And what I find frankly repulsive is there's black identitarians and I would say black supremacists and black race baiters who constantly get a free pass to sow their hate. Why? I mean, look at what happened when a prominent politician decided to take a different narrative. Dominic Raab. He said, I'm not taking the knee that only people, he said in a half joking way, I would take the knee with is the Queen and my wife when I was proposing to her. Now, anyone with a brain cell can understand what he was saying. But Black Lives Matter and left wing race baiters immediately said, oh, Rab is, How dare he not pander to Black Lives Matter? It was pathetic. I think he done the right thing or said the right thing. Why should he? Why should anyone take the knee for Black Lives Matter? I think you can agree with the principles. For example, if an innocent black person is a victim of police brutality, I say that officer needs to be arrested and face justice. That's my position. But the idea that I'm going to get down on my knee to Black Lives Matter just to prove a point, just to prove that I'm okay with the principles, is ridiculous. It's not going to happen. I remember LBC had this minute silence for George Floyd, and I'm thinking, wait a second, it's awful what happened to Mr. Floyd, but this man had a lengthy criminal record. He died in very controversial circumstances. But are we having a minute silence for an American national, in another continent, who had a pretty dubious background, but not a minute silence on the same radio station for the potentially thousands of health workers, black, white, and Asian, who have died from coronavirus? Um, the thing about, I'll round this up because I always feel with these sort of videos, it's so easy to be misunderstood and so easy to be misinterpreted. But that's the problem. I don't like talking about race issues, but I don't shy away from them because it's important to confront race baiting. It's important to confront dishonesty around these issues. It depresses me, but I'm not going to be silent. Um, Not because I'm a white guy, but because I'm a human being, and because I think that there's just a massive, massive amount of distortion, dishonesty going on, particularly with Black Lives Matter. Final point to Black Lives Matter. If you are in BLM and you're saying, "Oh no, you're wrong. You've got it all wrong," I have a simple question for you. Will you condemn Yusra Kagali? She's a co-founder of the Toronto chapter of Black Lives Matter, and she dehumanized all white people. Will you condemn her? Simple. If you cannot do that, then you've no right to claim that you are not part of a racist organization because you are.